Hey everybody, this is Doug Moran and welcome to the Community Technical WebEx. We normally do these on the first and third Wednesdays of each month. Michael Torello, Pentaho Pre-Sales Director, will be demonstrating how to use the Google Visualization API with Pentaho and action sequences. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat window to all participants and we'll answer them during the session. I'll break in Mike and ask you a question as they come through. That way they make it on the recorder. I'll also be monitoring the IRC channel, #Pentaho on Freenode, and afterwards we'll have time for questions and feedback. So I'll turn the presentation over to Mike.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Welcome everyone who's joined us this morning. A little background. Again, my name is Michael Torello. I'm the Pre-Sales Director here at Pentaho, based in the U.S. headquarters in Orlando. I thought it would be helpful to actually start presenting on some of these community WebExes to kind of create awareness of what else is possible with the Pentaho BI suite. One of the particular advanced capabilities within the Pentaho platform is what is known as the action sequence. The action sequence is a component that basically allows a lot of flexibility, extensibility in the BI platform without having to know Java. My background is primarily in the pre-sales realm of utilizing tools for within a software company, and as well as providing the additional outside-of-the-box capabilities utilizing those tools. The action sequence allows me a flexible way of providing content within an application without having to know how to code Java, as well as utilizing third-party technologies such as the Google Visualization API. I do understand that there are certain limitations to some of the third-party capabilities, such as the Visualization API is a hosted type of API, meaning the JavaScript library is available from Google's site. I have seen people actually been able to get the subsets of the code locally, but this is just giving you an example of how it could be used. At the end of the presentation, I will provide you with some additional links if you're interested. I have blogged about this. I'm an avid technical blogger for Pentaho exclusively. Part of my role is obviously to monetize on some of the capabilities that are available within our organization. That's how we stay in business. But I also do contribute to the community in the form of blogging, as well as in the form of providing samples in a section of the community called the Pre-Sales Consulting Portal. So not only my job, primarily responsible on monetizing within Pentaho, providing subscription capability for our prospects, turning them into customers, but I do contribute back to the community by providing a lot of what I develop and making it available publicly. So there are two sections that I do that, and that is the Pentaho Wiki, Consulting Portal, as well as my technical blog. And here you'll be able to find video demonstration and samples in addition to the community WebExes. So I would like to relay information up front. The Pentaho and Google Visualization API I thought was a neat way of providing additional visualization capability within the Pentaho BI suite utilizing an action sequence. So instead of getting down into the bits and bytes of Java, I kind of get into the bits and bytes of utilizing an action sequence, the API provided by Google Visualization. Now, frankly, I love the Google Visualization API. It is a way of having community contributions relatively available to other types of software components, such as Pentaho. So if I wanted to expand and provide visualization beyond what's available inside the box, I can actually go to the Google Visualizations API and select from a variety of different components made available, from simple gauges to intensity maps to motion charts to Google Maps integration, even simple pies, as well as pictographs and table components. These types of objects are available very easily with code markup, cut and paste examples that you can very easily select, and studying how to utilize the API. Now, the concept within the API is that you basically have a structure of methods and functions that access the JS API library, and then you have code markup and then data formats and configuration options available to the API. So at this is nothing new, or should be nothing new to you in the sense of, okay, it's an API, I understand how to use an API. So prerequisite knowledge would be I need to understand how to use configuration options, default data types, description, understanding what level of functionality is needed in these methods or operations. Once you have that understanding, probably like anybody, if you're like myself, you like to learn from example. So they provide a great example, this particular markup here, and they even provide the visualization playground, which is a great addition to start testing out what your visualizations are going to look like. So in this particular example now, where does an action sequence come in? So we're going to briefly discuss an action sequence now. And an action sequence is nothing more than actually an XML document that I believe the terminology is a deserialized, it actually represents a deserialized Java file where you can, and Doug, you can correct me if I'm wrong because you guys are one of the founders with that, but it enables me to provide inputs and outputs, access external content, execute queries from a variety of different data sources, including our own data integration, and then get those result sets and use them in other what we call components, or are represented as what's known as a process action. So an XML document structure is created with different nodes or tags, and each tag or node represents something within an action sequence. But you don't have to write XML. We provide a tool called Design Studio, which is an Eclipse plugin that basically allows you to represent an action sequence visually, providing locations for inputs, external resources, process actions, or what are known as the component architecture, getting data from different sources, setting different data sets to access different report outputs, new PRPT file, our legacy for our older versions, as well as even adding output objects to our JPivot, for example, you could utilize. Or our chart component library. These are a few here, but these aren't all of them. These are just some of the standards, and then you can manipulate those with a chart reference. Something secure filtering, and one very powerful component called the message template component, which enables you to utilize external content and kind of use like an escape sequence or an escape language where you can do substitution at runtime with different parameters. Addition to sending content to emails and printers, and I bet you didn't know there are some hidden gems sending stuff to file systems as well as FTP sites that are available within the component library. With our backend scheduler, execution of SQL commands so you can perform other SQL processes, executing action sequences, and even executing Pentaho ETL jobs. So these are some of those capabilities available immediately with an action sequence. This is the Google Visualization API. I'm going to focus on three important components. Relational component, which gets data from some source. In this case, we're going to use a simple SQL query. And we're also going to focus on the JavaScript component, which enables me to iterate through a result set produced by the relational query. It allows me to grab that result set and then format it for something. And that something, in this case, is going to be the API, the Google Visualization API. And then finally, the message template component, which allows me to bring it all together. Okay, I'm going to give you a couple examples of how we're going to utilize this capability. So I'm going to open up, let's make a copy of this bar chart. And inside Design Studio, you have locations of action sequences. There is a tutorial available on the Pre-Sales Tools page or the Pre-Sales Consulting portal that will show you how to set up Design Studio. This Community WebEx is meant really to just jump into showing you how to use the Google Visualization API. So the assumption is that you have some understanding already utilizing action sequences or Design Studio. What I've done to prepare you to understand the beginnings of how we're going to do this is I've created a very simple action sequence. Okay, and a simple action sequence here, for example, will actually just get data from something. And let me bring up, let's see here, let me bring up one of my examples. Okay, what we're going to do is basically access data utilizing this query here. So let me clean up this here. So we've got country, that out, take this out here. What I'm doing is just cleaning up an action sequence that I previously ran that I parameterized. And the action sequence component I'm going to be using is the relational query. Okay, and just to show you what I'm going to do within the relational query, I have a SQL query that is going against MySQL. Okay, and all this is going to do is produce a data set or result set back. And you can see here, select country, some credit limit as credit limit, some credit limit times 2, credit limit 2 from customers grouped by country, and it produces a result set. Okay, so I have here as my relational component, and what I'm going to do is just some of the structure here where I have my relational component, and this is basically going to produce a form of an output. So that's a simple action sequence. And then you utilize this result set in any capacity. So here I'm just going to put it out to my output section. Okay, we have a simple action sequence. How we call an action sequence, there are a number of ways it could be called. The default way is through the Pentaho user console, but it could be called through our URL. It could be called through our APIs. There are a number of different ways. But now I execute this, and it just dumps the data. Done. Action sequence, retrieved the data, and it's done. All right, well, now maybe I want to utilize this data. Okay, so the next step that we're going to focus on is the JavaScript API. So what I did is now create something that's called a action sequence with JavaScript, okay, using the JavaScript result set or traversing that particular result set. So here I have a little bit different action sequence. Okay, so this basically selects the plant. It does a concat and formats the sum of line price and line cogs, and it groups by long, which is another value. Okay, so this type of result set, if you will, just to see it inside a different tool from a different database, this is going against my sales data. Okay, that's come back like this. So we plant sales and cost. We have report designers that basically can design all of this pixel perfect. I'm not covering that now. I'm just trying to show the correlation. But I can take this result set that comes back and start iterating through it, utilize our JavaScript API. Okay, so JavaScript API available inside the Pentaho BI platform where I can start utilizing capabilities and methods of operations such as get metadata, get column headers. Okay, and you can see I actually take the input query result, which is an output of the relational or SQL query result, and I use it as an input in the JavaScript result. And you can see headers, query result, get metadata. And as we go through this, you can actually see now I'm actually using a for loop. So at this point, it's standard programming. The program you learned back in college, you learned back in high school, for loops, if, then, else, arrays, strings, variables. You're utilizing standard constructs to now start creating a structure that you're going to manipulate that result set. Again, keeping in mind we have report designers for this, but I'm showing you how you can start evolving past that. So here what you can actually see now is I'm running a loop that actually gets the column names, gets the row headers. You can see here row equals 0, row is less than row count, which is equal to query result, get row count, another method available. And you can see I'm using append to variable, and I'm also utilizing some HTML row tags for tables. So what am I doing here is I'm actually building an HTML table dynamically through the JavaScript rule. And then you can see query result get value at row, comma, colon. Okay, so this is actually going to iterate through each row and column and produce the value. So it goes through like the array of values, closes the table, and then outputs the message. So the resulting output of this is something called message buffer. See here, I have our message buffer, response to content, grab action sequence, and now I'm going to paste it in the URL. And that is the result that is created. So instead of a raw result, I've created a formatted result, okay, utilizing the JavaScript step, and the format came through utilizing the capability within appending these values. Okay, so any type of HTML, styling, anything can be done through here. So that's an example of now using the query along with the JavaScript step. Next example, yes?
I had a question. So you're creating a HTML table to use it later with the Google API? Is that basically what's happening there?
No. So what I'm doing here is going through the 3 components that are going to lead up to the Google Visualization API. So the first component is the SQL lookup rule, or the relational one that gets the data. Second one is the JavaScript rule, which manipulates the data. So, and then the third one is going to be the message template, and then I'm going to show you how I put them all together. Okay. Okay, so again, just to reiterate, I'm not using the JavaScript rule to create an HTML table. I'm using the JavaScript rule to show you the functionality that's available through the AIs that we're going to then use for the Google Visualization API. So the next example is the message template. Okay, and you can see here in another page, I have the tool called Message Template. And what a message template allows you to do is call an external resource. Okay, so here you can see here I can say call my HTML page.htm. And here's my HTML page.htm. It's my HTML page.htm. And we open it up in the text editor just to give you an idea. You can see it's got Google Visualization API code in it. Okay, so what I'm going to do actually is show you how it can be done inline as well. So I'm going to go here, select text. I'm going to go to the visualization. I'm going to copy the code from the sample, and I'm going to paste it right in. This is enabling me now to utilize message template as an object to call external content. That external content could be an SVG file, scalar graphics, it could be an HTML page, it could be a JavaScript file, it could be an XML document, basically any type of ANSI standard object that you can start manipulating. And there we provide an output name, call the output, designate it to response content. And guys, I know I'm going fast here because we only have a limited time, and obviously you could always replace back if you wanted to. But again, covering the message template component, and now you can see calling the action sequence, we have the Google Visualization API. To reiterate, we haven't done any dynamics yet, but you've seen the three components of getting a query, manipulate a query with the JavaScript, and then calling the external content with the message template. So those are three powerful components available in the action sequence. So this now, what we're going to do is make this dynamic with the query. Okay? And what we're going to do is now produce a result that might look similar to, let's say, here's a bar chart going against that query. So how do we do that? Okay, so now we're going to put it all together. And how to put it all together? Here's one that is pre-built. Let me call this out here. And let me paste this in here. Okay, and you can see now Google Visualization API bar chart, and it's now accessing the query and then producing the results. And let's do how we did that. Okay, so step one is we have a relational query. The relational query returns a result set. Step two, we have the JavaScript rule where the query result is an input. Inside the JavaScript, what we do is we start setting variables such as row count and column count, utilize API commands such as get row count, get column count, and what it does now is use a for loop. Row equals 0, row is less than row count, increment row. And then use a loop to go through the columns. At this point, what we're doing is now we have a variable called the data, and then we'll start using some append syntax. And we're going to put right here to show you what we're doing. You'll note that it says the data, data set value. Well, if you recall, within the Google Visualization API, there was data components. There was data.addColumn, data.column number sales, data.addColumn number expenses. There was data.addRows, how many rows of data, and there was data set value. These are all the API commands that are available for that chart. These are hard-coded. So what we're going to do is make this section dynamic. Okay, so we're going to iterate through our query result and dynamically build this code, which is just nothing more than a string that we're appending to. So go here, you can see the plus equal syntax. We append to the data variable, and we create data.setValue. Okay, utilizing the variable row and column. Query result get value at row, comma, column. This actually creates the data string. And then we have an output called the data, and we have an output called row count. Okay, if you remember, row count is query result.getRowCount. Go to the message template component, and notice that we have data.addRow count, and then the data. This curly brace syntax, that is a substitutional syntax that says give me the value and replace that with whatever was the resulting output. So where there's a curly bracket and then a variable name, that's represented as an input into this template component. We put name, and we provide our response content, and execute our visualization API either through the user console, as you see here, or through a URL, and then the resulting output is what you see in the Google visualization. So this is a representation of a very simple bar chart. Okay, just to show you some other quick manipulations with the power of the message template, you can see in the message template I have a title, and the name of that title is Company Performance. What I'm going to do here is delete Company Performance and replace that with curly brace, and I'll put in my underscore title. I'm going to provide an input, I already did here, called my title, and say this is my title for Pentaho. I'm going to save that. Okay, and we have, let's see, okay, it's my underscore title, so let's take this and make this my underscore title. Little validation check by the Design Studio tool. We save that, and now when I refresh this, you'll notice that it changes the title component inside the template. So what does this mean? This means now you have an input variable, my underscore title, that could then start creating, utilizing our API, utilizing your own user interfaces, .NET, Perl, PHP, Cold Fusion, any, struts, any type of UI interface structure now you can start adding Pentaho content with. So here I'm going to say another title, and then it changes that value through a URL parameter pair. These are the underlying fundamentals that make this powerful, and this can work not only with the Google Visualization API, it could work with other third-party components that are available that take a format. If it's JSON, if JavaScript object notation, if it's XML, okay, if it's some format that is needed, the action sequence can make that format and make it available. So let's go back into this example here. And with due respect to time, we have a couple minutes left.
Hey, Mikey?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, you're fine on time. So if you're
not, okay.
This is good. We got the whole hour. So.
Okay, okay, no problem.
I do have a couple of questions I want to break in on, though.
Yeah, so let's pause for some questions.
All right, so one of them was asking about if HTML headers are required for any of this.
No, they are not. They're not required, but they could be appended to if necessary.
And there's another question about whether we could use Java rather than JavaScript, and I'll answer that one. There's no Java component, so you couldn't type Java into the Design Studio window, but the platform is built so that components are drop-inable, and there's some there's a kind of a tutorial on the wiki on how to create a new component, and that would be Java, but that would be something very specific. But that is the way that you would interface the platform with some other tool or application. So each of those components is how we talk to like Kettle or JFree or any of the third-party applications. And in the wiki under the recording for this session, I'll put links to both the JavaScript, JavaScript functions are available, and how you would create a component. And another question would be what mechanism was used in the OpenBIR analytics example? And I don't know if you're familiar with that one, Mike, are you?
Yeah, so the OpenBIR analytics example is exactly the same, utilizing an action sequence to feed R. The only other thing that I'm not aware that could be possible is that they could have wrote a custom Java class and called it in an action sequence. So from the understanding of watching that video, I believe it is utilizing the same technology where an action sequence feeds R.
And one of the other comments was the width's a little big for some people. So I don't know if you can resize on the fly, but at least stick with a little bit more in the upper left-hand corner.
Okay. Yeah, I do apologize for that. The monitor that I have on this laptop, it's widescreen, and for some reason my resolution in WebEx is locked to like 1600. So I'll try to manipulate upper. You said upper left.
Yeah, just the normal.
Okay, no problem. I'll do my best. Okay.
And like I said, as long as you got some good stuff to show and you're in a groove, then don't worry about the time.
Okay, cool. So where I'd like to branch off this conversation is just to show you other examples. So once you have the basic concept of utilizing the action sequence with the Google Visualization API, you can start exploring the library and start kind of applying that concept to the other visualizations, such as pie chart, pictograph, and even a simple gauge. And then if you want to start exploring past that, you can start utilizing intensity maps and tables. Here's another example with multiple tabs. So this is showing booked versus planned, regional. And if you want to explore, even further, there is something, for example, called a motion chart. And built as a prototype within Pentaho, utilizing some of the sample data, motion chart looks like this within the Google visualization. Dynamic flash-based chart that takes data, has some selections to start selecting the different metrics, linear or logarithmic, as well as changing display types. And it works as a time series where you'll actually play and watch the bars change over time. It's actually more dynamic if you turn it into a bubble or scatter plot. And you can see how the objects are even moving in a trend away from each other over time or closer together, etc. So part of that requirement you'll see here in the API on the bottom, same concept. Add column, right? You create a string of results in the form of an array, let's say, or some kind of object notation. And then Pentaho can also utilize that with the same concept. So what I've done here is put a very simple prompt on that. Let's go and execute the sales data motion chart. So this is going against some sales data. I supply a region as a prompt, meaning it's going to execute that query and provide only values for north. And then taking out the result from that, it's going to produce the sales data motion chart. Okay, so from the year of January 1st of 2003 all the way to December 30th of 2003, I'm plotting information for cost, for sales. I have all my locations. I can choose, let's say, respect to coloring on cost, or maybe respect to coloring on sales. And you can see the different heat map ranges. And then you could have different selections of the different products that are available. And then you can view this selection over time. Or you can turn from a scatter to a pie and then see the representation in an animated style, as well as view it as a time series. Okay, so this gives you another way of utilizing flexible visualization capability available within the Google Visualization API and then applying it to Pentaho. And then where the added benefit comes in, and please guys don't kill me because I'm going to show an Enterprise Edition feature, the dashboard designer can now utilize it because it's an action sequence. So in this case, I'm just going to select a theme and a layout, and I'm going to insert an object. In this case, we're going to insert that sales data motion chart. And now notice the parameterization panel. So now, not only do I have the power of the action sequence with the Google visualization, but now I have the power of utilizing parameterization within the dashboard designer. Okay, so if I were to change this and say, well, I only want to look at east, and I want to change this date range, let's say from 2003 to 2002, I now have the power of the action sequence to thank for that, where now I have a dynamic Google visualization showing me those elements. And you can see only Boston and Orlando are in the eastern region. If I type west, we own Los Angeles and Seattle. So you can see completely dynamic based on those selections. And utilizing the power now of the dashboard designer and parameterization in the action sequence. Okay, that is all I have on the Google Visualization API. I'm going to pause in one brief moment to explain, for more questions. The last thing I'd like to leave you with is to show you some flexibility utilizing the Community Dashboard Framework and utilizing custom components that utilize the same concept. So what I wanted to focus on here is this is what's called a time series created with the Timepedia Chronoscope widget. I have a blog entry on this as well. I'm using my mouse to wheel in and looking at data over time. It's an active component that uses JavaScript object notation, which is created from an action sequence. Same concept. An action sequence is feeding this widget. This is a GPL-based widget. And then this map is a SVG map, scalar vector graphics, same concept. Utilizing an action sequence, retrieving the result, and then formatting the result, and then plotting the data on the scalar vector graphics. And maybe we go and have another community WebEx to see how we can work with SVG as well. So you're not limited on what you can do with the Pentaho suite and action sequences. You just have to have a little creativity and a little imagination. Okay, Doug, if we want to take any additional questions.
One of them was asking if the X-Actions and various demos are available someplace.
Yes, they are. For example, I am making actually a library available to product management shortly that will have additional examples, but we have the pre-sales consulting portal. The pre-sales consulting portal, I'll make sure Doug gets this link. There's tip samples and advanced techniques, including API samples. And then here we have our AJAX, HTML, JSP, API samples, an example using Fusion Charts, which talks about the same concept, interactive example using AJAX API, and message template component, and divs. Also, traffic light widget and dynamic Google Map widget. As well as CDF examples, which there are a variety that come with CDF, but some people want to know about the technique I've developed called guided ad hoc. So I've created a simple guided ad hoc and dashboard framework sample also, which utilizes guided ad hoc. If you haven't worked with us yet or worked with me, guided ad hoc is just a parameterized reporting technique that allows you to take a standard report designer report and then basically have it dynamically change sort groups or columns utilizing simple controls. So these are available on the pre-sales consulting portal.
We'll have a link to that as part of the recording page, with the other information. And I've got Pedro here in the Orlando Towers, and he had a question. He was also, I think, glad to see CDF up there.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Pedro. Sorry I haven't had a chance to come in yet. I'm planning on being in tomorrow. Hopefully I'll be able to meet you.
Sure thing. Question I wanted to ask you was about the conditions where we can use the Google Visualization API. I know that, for instance, to use Google Maps, they require a license key, and one of the conditions for us to be able to use that without having to pay a license fee is that the sites where the API is used must be publicly accessible, outside without logins and stuff like that. Does the Google API, does the Google Visualization API also has a similar condition? Can we use it regardless of the conditions?
Correct. That I don't know, but you can see for fine print release, refer to terms of service, commercial use. So there's addition API terms of service that they can look at. I don't know the specifics on that. At that point, it kind of goes in the hands of the person who wants to utilize it. Assume there is very similar.
Okay.
It looks like they use it for porn. I saw that up there.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah. The had I guess this is a comment. Brandon liked the time series dashboard, and if there's on that site that you mentioned earlier, if you've got some information on how to build that.
I do. On my blog section, I believe inside the April, it's called the continuation of the unmatched power and flexibility, and I talk about using Chronoscope Timepedia, and I had a YouTube video up here too that displays it. So so that's basically it's the same concept, and Chronoscope Timepedia has changed. I provide the link to it. Okay, this just to let you know, this is not a original example. I'm not accepting full credit for this. There is Zachary Zeus, one of our partners from BizCubed in Australia, originally came up with this idea, but it was in a JSP page. What I did is convert it to a action sequence only object. Okay. Right now, I have mine working in Firefox. There are some specific IE things to tweak, but to let you know that particular example that I've worked on, I removed it from any JSP orientation and changed it into a action sequence only. In other words, you do not need the JSP. I architected it in such a way where all JavaScript files, cascading style sheet files, images are all fed directly from the solution repository, therefore eliminating the need for a JSP and external resources, and then providing only an HTML page within here. And you can see it's pretty much the same concept that we've used within this particular example. Okay, so here's the simple interactive time series. You can have some flags, get data. I've made this kind of efficient where you could actually use an action sequence to call itself. So just to give you an example, the prompts for values calls in the HTML page, and then if the flag is 1, it returns a JSON value. So if you're actually interested in seeing how it works, here's an action sequence. I'm going to hit this, going to execute this, my prompt with all the values. Okay, I click OK. Now it loads that particular object. Now if I change the flags that are available here, there's a get data flag that I provide. So if I back into here and we go to import and we have get data and I change this from 0 to 1, what you're going to see happen is it just returns JSON. Okay, that's what Chronoscope needs. Chronoscope just needs the JSON string. That's it. So this action sequence here is just returning the source of the page. It's turning a very long string of JSON values. And then the Chronoscope interprets that as a variable. Okay, so if you're interested in a little bit more guts of this, go into the actual HTML page. You can see here, actually document. I could provide this as a sample too, to those who are interested. You can see that I'm actually using get resource servlets to actually get the JavaScript files. Now with the introduction of the new servlet called get CDF resource, you can actually leave the name of the JS file .js. Get resource originally was just a servlet for getting images, but now with the introduction of CDF get resource, we can actually pull in any external resources in the solution directory. This was developed before then. And then you see here I'm using the action sequence, Pentaho Action Ajax API, to actually get the JSON message. Okay, you can see here a hard code get data equals 1. So what this will do is now execute that action sequence, feed this variable called get JSON message, and then I just use the getJSON message as the object, var equals object, and then from this point it takes over with the Chronoscope API. And you can now at this point it takes the data element in. Okay, see here's the Chronoscope method, and there's the data that feeds it. Okay, so in recap, an action sequence is grabbing a query, formatting the result set into a JSON message, and then feeding it to the particular component. And the actual JSON creation is done through this create JSON. You can use a message template here. I just use JavaScript. Again, creating a variable, start formatting the envelope, if you will, using a for loop, create a message, very simple like I did with the API, and then resulting out in what's called JSON done. And that's your result. And then changing the flag back 1 to 0. Okay, you can see here I use if-then conditionals. If get data is 0, prompt me for the values, call the HTML template. So that's what's happening under the covers here. So get data flag is 0, it displays the HTML template. Then the HTML template has some code, which is the Pentaho Ajax API. There's a function called onChronoscopeLoad. I call the same action sequence, but this time change the data flag from 0 to 1. So when it runs it again, so it's an action sequence calling itself. The first action sequence displays the HTML page. The HTML page then calls the action sequence with a different data flag. And then in this case here, I have if get data equals 1, then it gets the query. This is just using a very simple SQL query, and then creates the JSON. And feeds it to the HTML page. So it's kind of an efficient way. You could have multiple action sequences. I kind of like trying to create my examples efficiently, so when people ask for a sample, I only have to send them a couple of files.
Mike, can you show what that output looks like? The output variable in Design Studio. I'm assuming it's just just pumped out the content, but somebody was asking.
Oh yeah, output is just response content.
Output is.
Yeah, it's just response content. Okay, and probably notice what happens here. The trick is also name your outputs the same. So it reduces warnings. The output processor handler looks for the output object. So note that I have it called JSON_done, JSON_done. So you name them the same. So depending on which conditional run, it'll use the same output object. It does probably speak better to that because you guys have been on the original development of the BI platform.
Yeah, and I've forgotten so much of that stuff that. But
if you need to elaborate,
it kind of allow you to do that, to block stuff out, and as long as you've got the same returns coming out of those blocks.
Correct.
And you don't have to try to manage a whole bunch of actions. Are you in the file-based or the DB-based repository?
For development purposes, I always use file-based because I can make quick changes and iterations without having to go refresh the repository every time.
This is actually one of the questions, and that's one of the reasons why there's two of them.
Yeah, that is a hassle to have to in a development instance. For those of you who want to just elaborate on what was being asked, Pentaho comes with a solution repository for production purposes. Meaning that it's read from a database as opposed to the file system. However, there is a file called Pentaho objects spring.xml. There is a bean that you could uncomment and comment the other one. So, for example, mine says platform repository, file-based. In a production environment, you're probably going to want to use DB-based. And that just means because Action Sequence Editor, Design Studio does not have a published facility, meaning it does not publish remotely. You have to save it to the file system. So if you're in a remote installation, and this could be seen in my demonstrations, you will need a network file share to the BI server or a shared UNC, whatever you want to call it, and save directly, or you need to set up some kind of FTP access back and forth to the remote installation. Okay, obviously everything works smoothly on my system because I'm all self-contained on one box.
Right, and that was all we had for the chat QA window. We do have a couple of people in the teleconference, so I'm going to unmute you now. And if you've got a question, just let it fly. Otherwise, we'll be ready to wrap it up. Anybody on the call have a question?
I have a question about security. Lately, in like PRD 3.6, some environmental variables were introduced. It seems like there's some ability using exceptions to perform an authorization function as opposed to authentication. So, for instance, maybe a set of certain filters could be added to a SQL query, based on somebody's server role. And I heard all of this had to be done through X actions in some way, shape, or form. Is it easy to demonstrate that quickly?
Possibly. I do have Report Designer 3.6 on, but you are correct. So what they are doing now, working with Thomas and the other product management team members and engineers, is they're bringing a lot of the X-action functionality over into Report Designer. So we have introduced easy-to-use environmental variables where an action sequence had something called principal name, and it was principal role. Let me share my desktop again while I bring up those areas. Just bear with me one moment. Get some time. This is not the right version. So inside an action sequence, you could create a variable, and by default, we get everything through a REST protocol, right? URL parameter pair, which would be origin request. But you can get it from a session variable, Pentaho global variable. Runtime, I'm not sure exactly what that means. I haven't really used that much. But then security, you can actually go in and type in something called principal role or principal name. And what that will do is return a single string of the username that's logged in or an array of all the roles that are there. They've actually introduced that into the PRPT format inside the Report Designer. So underneath where's my Report Designer 3.6, there are the environmental variables for user and role. So when the user logs in, you can actually grab the logged in username, pass that dynamically into a parameter, which could then be used in any of the objects inside Pentaho. I think I have, let's see, so here is the 3.6. Okay, and here is our data elements, and you can see environmental roles, role array, username. Okay, so if I drag that into like the detail section, okay, and publish this. Now I don't have a BI server running, but technically now you will have the login name. I think so. This is in recorded format on another community WebEx. If you want to go into detail on that, the one that Curtis did.
Oh, is that in there?
Yeah, it's on the community WebEx page. It's the last 3.6 update. Curtis demonstrates this capability actually.
Okay, sweet. I forgot about that.
It's not on WebEx. I think it's on a YouTube, but he does a pretty good job of going through the pieces. Okay, good.
And there's one other way to handle that. I guess and it would still be usable in 3.6, but kind of one of the early user-based security things that we had implemented would be what we call a session variable. And it's basically in a session action sequence. You can set up your server so that when somebody logs into a new session, it'll run one or more action sequences. And one of the things that you can typically do is a query. So possibly taking that person's user ID and doing a select regions, what regions they're allowed to see from that user, and then that return result set would get stored in the session. So for your output, you'd say, I want this parameter stored in the session. And then that becomes a parameter that's actually available to that user no matter what action sequence he runs each time. So it's kind of a global for that person. And one more level is we've also got a global action or set of actions that you could set up to run. And they would do the same thing when the server comes up. those action sequences get run, and then the outputs can get stored in a global. So when you're looking at the inputs in Designer, you'll see, runtime, session, global as, inputs, and that'd be one way to make data available that you could use in subsequent queries as filters in order to provide security. The new stuff is easier if it's specifically for the reports. That older session and global parameters are useful for any generic action sequence.
And an example of that, Doug, that I've used here is actually utilizing to populate these drop-down lists. Drop-down lists are populated from in-memory session variables because I start up action sequence. So you'll see here in System Actions, I have Finance Listbox Queries regions.xAction, Finance Listbox Queries prod types.xAction. If I actually go to those, you can see here we have regions.xAction. Okay, and you notice that the region result destination is session. Okay, then I have a query that pulls it from the session. So I have this called no query regions. It's just an action sequence that grabs a variable from the result. And you can see origin, session, region result. So when the user logs in, it actually executes these queries and then populates these boxes. So if I log in with a different user, let's say, my query says where user equals A, B, C, or role equals whatever, these boxes will dynamically change with only the values they can see. And that's a good application for that, utilizing what's called a startup action sequence and session variable.
That carries over directly to Report Designer, did you say, or?
This carries over directly to the use session during runtime, not Report Designer. This is for anything that is available during runtime, using an action sequence.
Okay. I noticed on the Enterprise console there, you had those action sequences listed. Where does that wind up saving those configuration settings in the Pentaho solution directory? It's like Pentaho solution/system somewhere?
Yes. So this is an admin Enterprise Edition console, so we provide all the user interface to do that. But in the actual location, it's under system, and I believe it's under just system, and then there's a value called, let's see, I think it's in Pentaho XML. Is it in? It's in one of these files here. It's either Pentaho system config, Spring Beans. Doug, I don't know. Do you know which file gets updated?
I'm looking on my directory right now.
That's funny because here it is. Session startup actions.
.xml. Thanks, Dan.
There it is. And this is, I think, documented in the wiki somewhere too.
Okay, if you're using parameters in the new Report Designer, number one, I noticed the parameters look significantly different in Report Designer when you publish a report versus somebody who conjures up some kind of X action. This is kind of like the new style and the old style. So that being the case, how would you integrate that kind of functionality using the Report Designer? Do I have?
Oh, go ahead.
If I had to go unzip that PRPT file and muck with some X action in there, and then
I'll show you a little technique. Okay, this is a beautiful part of the Pentaho BI suite. X actions can support PRPTs. Okay, so you'll see here I have one called where is it? Call a PRPT file. So if you want to utilize action sequence capability with a PRPT file, call a PRPT file in an action sequence, and then you can set parameters. So if I input from a session, okay, we call this my input, and we put in some value. I can select my report, put in here called my input, and this is called SQL Server Fruit Dump, which utilizes SQL Server. Let me just go in here, start my SQL Server. So what I've done here is created an action sequence that has an input that calls a PRPT that's going to pass this parameter called myInput. So now what I have to do is just open up this SQL Server PRPT file in my report designer. And we'll do that here. And the secret sauce with that is you have to add the parameter in the report designer as well. And then those would be reflected accordingly. Okay, here, we'll open up. See if I got my SQL Server fruit report. Nope, probably not here, so we'll open this. Oh. And I have this under BI Developers, action sequence examples, SQL Server fruit dump. Okay, so here's that PRPT file. It's a very simple dump that goes against SQL Server. Let me make sure my data set is configured correctly here. Query, preview. So there's my data. Okay, there's the report. Now if I go in parameters, add parameter, I add the same parameter name that I added in my action sequence. So myInput. We call that myInput. Make that just a simple text box. Make that a string. Okay, you have that parameter myInput. Now that could be used inside any object that is represented, as a formula. So if I want to put a label in the report header, go into my structure, I have our value here, click on this formula value. I can now say equals, bracket, my input. That is the correct syntax for this. And then if I run this and publish it to the BI server, it should represent that in there. So here I'm just going to navigate to that example. Okay, now keep in mind this is going to overwrite this, but I'm not going to run it because we can now call it from an action sequence. Okay, so here's the action sequence that's going to call that PRPT file. Okay, see now some value is represented. Does that make sense? Any input that is available inside the URL, just like we did, we can change it here. And learn how to spell. That's another way of providing dynamics from an action sequence. And then when you're more advanced, you'd be able to take on this capability within your queries. Okay, so people look at how action sequences years ago could do dynamic SQL queries. Well, this query is a profit and loss query that takes in numerous inputs. Okay, they're actual SQL statements. If I go to my structure of my master report, you'll notice my query isn't a SQL query that is part of the designer, but it's actually what's called a message format, and I have it as part of inline in the report. You can see all the representation now with these $ parentheses. These are all dynamic variables as part of a SQL query. So you'd be able to do substitution in the PRPT or in the action sequence.
Wow.
Okay. And then as you become more advanced with this capability, you can also do inline JavaScript and HTML. So what I'm here is embedded a very simple inline JavaScript editor, which I found on Dynamic Drive, which is just an editing of a table. Watch what I do when I execute this report. Okay. Note that it hovers, but that's not going to work now because I got to execute it online. So let me go and execute this one online. And the reason for this, I had a use case where somebody said, I need to do some inline estimating. So what made it cost really only 20, what if they were 20 million less? So I just changed our cost, and now I could view the estimate of the change. And utilizing a PRPT and an action sequence, I'm able to do a write back to a temporary table, and now showing a what-if estimate directly within Pentaho. Okay, and that's the cause of mixing action sequences and PRPTs together. Some powerful stuff that you can do with the platform.
The last question I'd have, if you'd be kind enough to entertain it, the parameters listed out by default in a report or an action are usually listed vertically, which wastes a lot of visual space. I've seen an XSL file, I believe, in the system directory, custom, I think, but none of those things really seem to take effect. How could I get those parameters to list out horizontally instead of vertically?
Yeah, okay, so the prompting interface with an action sequence uses an XLL sheet to style the object, and they are listed in a vertical fashion. The PRT file does the same thing, but it provides a collapsible panel. To list them up in a horizontal fashion, I believe there are some changes you can make in the XSL to maybe change the alignment. Doug would probably know better, or somebody else. Just to let you know, we are making changes. I don't know if it's going to be Enterprise Edition or Community, but the concept is that our parameterization capability, we're going to be able to start moving the objects preform within this area here. Wow. Now, so if you wanted to create your own parameterization panels, the only other way to do that is by utilizing our APIs, and that's basically where you start developing a HTML page. And this is an example utilizing the CDF component. Where, in this example, I actually used the CDF tab, but before the CDF tab was available, I utilized my own push-button layers, and where you just house the parameters inside different layers. Okay, you can make these templates as robust or as minimal as you'd like. Okay, so this is utilizing the CDF range picker control. It's put in a layer with a button that just changes the different parameters. A sample of this on the pre-sales consulting portal, actually.
So the short answer is in Report Designer in some version, 3.7, possibly, maybe a little bit after that, we'll have a editor for parameter pages. The platform with action sequences already has the ability to provide for its parameter provider a XSL to manipulate what's currently generated, or you could also supply an HTML page that will, or an HTML page that'll render your own UI. You do lose some other functionality when you do that, like the automatic scheduling and subscription parameters. So you'd have to kind of do that on your own. There are some under BI examples. There's two examples that show HTML parameter provider or page and XSL parameter page. So, Mike, as always, your ability to do an ad hoc demo kind of blows me away.
Oh, thank you.
And if there's no other questions, I think we'll wrap it for today.
Okay. Anybody on this WebEx, I'll provide you links to my blog. There's a link to follow me there on Twitter if you'd like. I do post things. I'm not an average, you're an avid tweeter, but I do sometimes a Ustream technical blog, video blog. Occasionally I'm looking at starting that up as well, in addition to using Community WebEx with Doug and the team. So just if you're interested in knowing me, I usually post things when I create some stuff. It's a good way of being alerted that, some of the things you want to see that I do.
Well, I think that these kinds of demonstrations really show the capability of the BI platform, and this is where everybody's implementation needs to go. I think this kind of stuff needs to push to be the standard, rather than the exception.
Absolutely. That's part of the reason, I'm on the pre-sale side, engaging with the reps, showing the possibilities with the software, having the ability to, go outside the box and then applying that little bit of creativity and imagination to that as well. So, definitely engage us, and I'd be more than happy to help you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Doug, thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to the next one. If there's any questions that we missed, just shoot them over to Doug, and I'd be more than happy to get the answers back to you.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Pedro. Hopefully I'll see you this week. Take care.
And, I'll be putting a recording of the presentation along with those links either late today or sometime tomorrow. And again, we normally do these presentations on the first and third Wednesdays of each month. Coming up in March, we'll have an Agile BI update, and the PAT team will also give us a product status and demo. PAT is the Pentaho analysis tool. Keep an eye on the wiki and the forums for updates to the schedule. And if you have a topic you think the technical community would be interested in, would like to present, or is a topic you'd like to hear about, please contact me, dmoran@pentaho.org. Goodbye, everybody.